All right, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this legitimately. There are only three tiers of gods: S, A, and B. The S tier on Voobly is Ra, Uranus, Zeus. These are the three best gods on Voobly, in my opinion. There's an argument. Actually, let's make this four tiers. But the second tier is very, very close to the first tier. I'm going to call this S minus. I'm going to call this A. I'm going to call this B. All right. This is S minus tier. Odin. Odin is S minus. The only reason Odin is not an S tier is because this Zeus matchup is too bonkers good for the Zeus player on the majority of maps. There's a couple of maps that Odin wins, like one or two, like Marsh and Watering Hole, but every other matchup Zeus wins. Now, the other reason why Odin isn't S tier is there's a couple of matchups which Odin wins against Odin. So those high hunt maps like Tundra, Marsh, Watering Hole, Blue Lagoon, Frozen Wastes. But then there's a bunch of maps that Odin's going to lose, like the low hunt maps, the water maps. And same goes for Ra. Like Odin wins a couple of maps against Ra, just not enough. So it's like he's almost there, but there's just too many maps that favor these gods. That's why I put him in S minus. Next tier below is the A tier. This one goes for Loki. Loki's here simply because he is a glass cannon, and there's a lot of maps that he doesn't win. But if he gets the maps he does win, and he gets a little bit of luck with the with where his army is, there's a lot of scouting issues and stuff like that. But Loki can do really well against all of these gods in the top tier. In any given day, but a lot of maps it sort of falls victim to the same problem that Odin has, in that a lot of maps he loses, but he doesn't have the consistency that Odin has because Odin has great hunt and map hacks and things like that. Who else is in this tier? I'd probably say Poseidon is here. If not in S minus, this is probably also an S minus god. I'm actually going to redo it. Poseidon's probably S minus, and that's simply just because of the meta that Matrius has created for Poseidon, the amount of work that Poseidon has had because of Matrius. And I don't know if Poseidon's actually S minus or if it's just that Matrius is that good. But Green Sea Squash plays a mean Poseidon, wins a lot of games with him as well. So it's probably an argument that he belongs up here. He can deal with Zeus. There's a good response to Zeus on every single map. You can definitely deal with Ra. We've seen plenty of Matrius versus Fox Ra versus Poseidon games where they go late game to show that the late game of Poseidon can compete with the Ra late game. So there's no real issue there. Poseidon versus Uranus is a relatively close matchup, probably 50-50 as well. So in fact, the only reason that Poseidon is probably here is because Odin probably has an edge over Poseidon. But not even on enough maps. So maybe even S tier. Maybe even S plus here. Like S tier with everything else. This is like, I can't decide. One of the two. Who else is in this A tier? It's probably Kronos. Kronos is probably here. Because Kronos can take games off everyone given the map is like bad for the opponent. But Kronos also doesn't have a strong late game. I don't know. Kronos is just one of those gods which I feel like is just a lesser version of Uranus in almost every way. There's like time shift is a cute mechanic. You can do some interesting side builds late game, but you never go late game because you die before then. And then you don't have the economy to do it anyways. And also in the A tier, you have to put in Set. Set's really, really strong god. Simply because you don't have to interact with your opponent in the game. If you can convert a couple of animals in the early game, then you can eat your own animals that you eat, and then you've just had good hunt, you've been able to economize really well. The issue with Set is that no access to Osiris means you lose late game against against Hephaestus. You lose late game against Hecate. You lose late game against Ragnarok, against Balder, or against Hell. So really the only opportunity for Set to win is by hitting timings with Horus, and that's hit or miss depending on the game. Hades is in A tier as well, and that's simply because Hades doesn't lose to any of these gods as well, but he doesn't win any of these gods. So it's like, he's just kind of sitting here being like, I can outplay you if I want, but I'm not quite on the level of everything else. If I was playing Poseidon in this game, or if I was playing Zeus in this game, I'd probably be doing better. That's probably why. Hades doesn't have a good answer to Zeus actually, because no Atlanta means you can't count the Centaur as well. But yeah. There's an argument that Isis is A tier. However, I'm going to make the proposition that everyone has learned how to play against Isis well enough that Isis can no longer function. And there is a way around it. And if you use the way, you probably jump into this A tier. So I'm going to say, I'm not going to reveal any of the strategies here or talk too much about it. But basically, if Isis grabs their second hunt first, then they can eat their first hunt in the classical age and not have any issues. But if they can't find their second hunt early, they are solid B tier because they get pushed off their second hunt and they're just behind and they can't function. There's a lot of good maps for Isis though. Like Anatolia is really good for Isis. Watering Hole is really good for Isis. Marsh really good for Isis. A lot of bad maps like Tundra. Actually, Tundra's probably okay. Like Blue Lagoon's really bad. Painted Desert's really bad. Frozen Wastes is really bad, etc., etc. B tier doesn't exist because Gaia and Thor are also S tier. All right. I actually think that Thor is also A tier, if I'm completely honest, being completely legit. Thor can beat any god. Let me put this down here for the moment. Thor can beat any god on this list, similarly to how Loki can, but you have to play perfectly. I think if you play perfectly with Thor, in terms of making decision making, not making mistakes, and your opponent plays perfectly, I feel like you're on the same level. But very rarely have I ever seen a Thor player playing perfectly, which is a problem. Now, Gaia is unfortunately in a solid B tier in 1v1s because she loses against Ra, she loses against Uranus, she loses against Zeus, she loses against Odin, she loses against Poseidon, she loses very hard against Loki, she loses very hard against Kronos, she loses very hard against Set. She probably does okay against Hades. Probably one of the few matchups she does okay. She probably does okay against Isis. And she loses against Thor. All that being said, I haven't played enough Gaia to be 100% certain about this. I feel like I've had some ideas with Gaia recently. Not the forest fire cheese, not the Gaia forest cheese, but some ideas about defensive expansion with Gaia. But I don't know. All right, and now we'll do extended edition.